Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist. And joining me today is
Steve Seay.
Now, Steve is one of my favorite people. He is actually a life coach, and he's also been trained in marriage and family therapy. And today's topic we're going to be talking about is very relevant in that respect, in that we're going to be talking about ways to become an awesome dad. And so thank you for joining me today, Steve.
You're welcome, Dr. Binus. It's my pleasure.
Now, of course, you have the training, but any other reasons why you might be a good choice for this podcast today?
Probably because I'm a father, even though as we discussed the topics today, I'm not perfect. It's a father in progress. So I think just relevant to the questions that we'll be talking about, I'm in the middle of it myself. So very much experiencing each of the talking points today. And so I think hopefully that's, by the biggest reason is just being a father of three beautiful children.
That's great. How old are your kids now?
So my oldest, Savannah, is 7. She'll turn 8 next week. Then Caleb, he's 3 years old. And then little Levi is 8 months old.
Wow. Yeah, busy times.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. And my kids are actually similar ages. Our oldest is 8, and then we have one that just turned 6. And then we have our youngest that just turned 2. And so you and I have a lot of empathy, I think, for one another.
Yeah. Yep.
And like you said, it is a work in progress, and understanding the theory behind fathering, behind parenting is one thing, but as you and I are very much learning in this process, there is a real learning curve when it comes to applying that theory.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, the one thing I want to emphasize for our listeners is that when it comes to fathering, there are so many benefits, of course, for ourselves, character development, et cetera, but also for our children in a huge way. And research actually shows that children of involved fathers tend to have a higher chance of being an A student, so their GPA is higher. They have higher IQs, better problem-solving skills. They have higher economic and educational achievement, 80% less likely to be in jail, more resilient, better physical health, more curious, less depression, less drug use, more life satisfaction, better emotional management, more playful, more socially accepted, more empathy, and tend to have higher moral values. So it's like quite a list. Because sometimes I think as fathers, we think like, oh, am I making that much of a difference? I think the research is very clear. It makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yes. All those points are so rich. And even as we look at today, it's not about a father being perfect. It's about a father being present and being a part of their families, all the experiences of their family that they go through. And I think that's a big part of those statistics too. It's not about being that perfect father, but it's about being willing to be a father and to be present with his family. Absolutely.
Now, we want to talk about 5 main points to becoming an awesome dad today. And so, Steve, I want to give you a chance to jump right into it. So what's the first point that we can tell our fathers what we can do to improve our fathering skills?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things you'll see that we see in today is the issues of social media and the impact of our phones in our pockets, just our different gadgets that call for our attention. And so for us as men, a lot of times that get a lot of our value from our work, sometimes that comes home with us and it stays with us. And so being able to have protected time for our family, being able to have time that we can dedicate to being present. And so part of that's the first point I'd say is being able to really separate those two out so that we can be with our family when we're with our family. And of course, when we're at work, we're focused on work too.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that I've been trying to get better at myself is really putting the phone on the shelf when I get home. And I don't always do a great job of it. I have to admit, but what I try to do is either totally, put it on the shelf when I'm home with the kids and it's, before their bedtime and that sort of thing, or at the very least, like putting it on silent. And then maybe if I'm expecting a message or something, like checking it once in a while, but not constantly like being like on the phone. And I have noticed it can be very tempting to just like, oh, I'll just check my email or check my messages. And I think the kids really pick up on that distractibility, even though they might not say anything. I think it does affect them.
They know. I mean, children are great observers of truth, and so they know when our eyes are gazed at something else other than them when they say, look at me, daddy. And I'm like looking at my phone. So one of the good ways, I love what you said there, is that's one of the things that I do is I put my phone on silent. That's a good place to start. Now, of course, if that's hard for you, then airplane mode also can work. And it's okay to be in the same room if you can handle that. Now, if you can't, one of the things I've had to do is put it like in the bedroom or somewhere in a different room. And so I'm not aware of it. So I have it out of sight, out of mind for that time. Now, like what you said, if I want to come back and check an email or see if I have any missed messages, I can set a time for that in the evening after maybe the kids are in bed or I've connected with my spouse. Then there could still be a time, so I don't have to be as anxious to see if I have anything missed, but it has its dedicated space for that.
I love that. And it reminds me of an author that I read. He really recommends basically schedule time for everything. And I think there's a lot to that. And I'm not saying we should just be over rigid, but it's important because then we have the sense of like, okay, no, this is the time I'm with my kids. And so I'm not going to allow anything to infringe on that, and even creates that mental space. Because sometimes we can be present with quote unquote present with our kids or our spouse or something like that. But in reality, our mind is kind of halfway drifting to this or, oh, I got to get this done. But if you can remind yourself, no, I have time scheduled to get that other thing done already. So now I can really be present. You can bring it back to really enjoying the time you have right now.
Right. And you think about that to add to that too, is a lot of people don't realize the just the dopamine rush that comes from a text message or checking an email it's higher than drugs or alcohol. Right. And people don't realize that we try to willpower our way through it. I won't check my phone. I won't check it. But our body really, it's attuned to that.
Absolutely.
And so by being able to remove that dopamine hit or remove that urge, that's one of the steps that we can take to be able to be present with our children and modeling that for them. Otherwise, what we do, they will do, right? It's like kind of like that monkey see, monkey do.
Yes. And that's exactly what it was going through my mind just now, is this idea of like, well, if we want our kids to have good control of their time and their media use, what do we need to model? And that dopamine hit you're talking about with media, even though it's strong for adults, it's even more powerful for kids because their brains are still developing. And that sense of reward from media is even more compelling and can be very difficult for them to control their media use. And
as you're saying, like if we could, like with our kids being little, depending on the age of your kids, that can also be hard to reverse, right? If we don't do that. And so that can be a hard thing to kind of go in reverse of removing the technology, and if we're not doing it now, that can be something that's even harder. So it's just good to get started on that path. That's why I think that's a very important and point that you make. And it's one of the I think the best ways that we can father our children.
Absolutely. So being present, scheduling time, that's the first point. So what would you say is the second point to becoming an awesome dad?
It goes kind of inside with that in the sense of, I would say connecting with your spouse, right? So that's a big one. Harder to do with family, with work demands, harder to do with, as we talked about the first point, with social media and our phones. And so having even protected time with our spouse, even if it's 5-10 minutes a day, right? Even if it's 5-10 minutes a day. I've heard, I started doing this with my wife as a good example of when I get home from work, I used to put our time at the end. That can work too after putting kids to bed. But what happens with most parents is we're exhausted after doing bedtime, is spending the first 10 minutes with her and then playing with the kids so they see the value of mom and dad needing to build that bond back from a long day.
I love the theory behind that, but I'm wondering, how does that practically work if the kids are demanding your attention? Because of course you have very young children. So how does that work if you're trying to hone in on, connecting with your spouse and maybe little Levi is screaming or whatever? How does that work for you?
For us, I mean, it's not going to work perfectly, right? So it's going to depend on if he's napping or, if Savannah and Caleb are preoccupied, for instance, our two older kids. And so sometimes it's giving them time to say, giving them something to do. Okay. Maybe an art, maybe jumping on the trampoline, doing something together where they're playing. And then we can connect. So Levi, sometimes, since he's 8 months, I can hold him. So he can be part of the equation, but it's important to even if it's a minute, right? Yeah. Working up to 10 minutes is good, but even if it's just a minute to connect, to recognize each other, to be present with each other before we go into family time.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I'm going to actually try it out myself, see how it works. Because you're right. Sometimes you put that in, and what I've realized is sometimes the spousal connection can actually, and the marriage connection can be the kind of the last priority, even though we know it shouldn't be. Like, it's the last thing of the day. And like you said, oftentimes we're just exhausted by that point. And then even if we try to connect, we're like kind of falling half asleep. And it's like, what kind of connection is this? Right. Yeah. So that's really good.
And there's value to that too. I mean, if that's like what you're saying, it is hard. It takes practice when we're coming home from work and seeing our spouse, but doing it before bed or after the kids are in bed is obviously an opportunity as well. It's just like you said, we're a little more tired and maybe less apt to be as attuned to our spouse. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I think the idea of being creative and maybe even at times spending a few minutes in the morning, and I know some people aren't morning people, but if you can both make a few minutes, like you said, it doesn't always take a long time. It's more about the quality. And I will say, I've realized, like, when I'm not on the same page with my wife, the kids, they inherently recognize that. They naturally realize that, and they can easily start to kind of split us, in other words, they'll try to like almost say, oh, if mommy says no, I'm going to go to daddy, and that sort of thing. So
absolutely. And that's why for us, for instance, it's important for us to be able to be on the same page, sometime praying together.
Yeah.
Sometimes just talking about what's for dinner. Yeah. Sometimes just being able to, because what's connecting for a short amount of time is good. There should also be time planned on the calendar, as best as we can, to have whether it's grandparents or a sitter come in, so we can actually get away for even an hour or two. And I've heard people that have done this. We've done this too with people even at our church community is doing swapping. So we'll have other people's kids over so they can get away if they don't have a grandparent or they don't have a babysitter. So sometimes even having a dedicated time built in, maybe it's even once a month where I can get away for an hour or two, undistracted. And so there's that daily, connecting for a few minutes, but then there's also each month trying to create time on the calendar to be able to be with your spouse.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whether you're at home and the kids are gone or we're gone and the kids are being watched.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those are some of the special times that can actually really help cement that relationship even stronger. And the kids really feel a lot more secure when parents are on the same page and when they sense that unified front. And so that's a very important thing. So what's the third point then?
Yeah. I'd say this is a big one for us as leaders, right? As men, and I used to hear the saying, leaders are readers. In that same context, as men, I think that spending time to recharge, spending time to be able to connect to our calling, to what we're called as men, to be leaders, to be husbands. And part of that could be in a morning routine. For those that aren't morning people, there can be an evening routine or even in the middle of the day for like lunchtime, right? If you're not a morning person. The thing I like about the morning routine, and this is why I like it, is because we're not as pulled and prodded by our children, by text messages, by people needing us, right? And so that can often be the best time, and we're refreshed from a good night's sleep, but that's often the time when we're not asked to do as much from other people. Yeah. So it's a great time for us to connect. Plus, spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. When we're recharged, we're more apt to be present with our family. We're more apt to see what's really going on with our spouse and our kids.
Yeah. This third point to me is super important because I've had that sense that, if I have the time, and it might seem almost selfish for some people, like I got to take that time for me and that recharge time. But, it's just a natural law that if we're not taking time to be refilled, we're not going to have anything to give, right? We're going to burn out. And so having that protected time with me and God, and also taking care, part of that for me is even taking care of my own body, it's huge, and we've talked about this before, the idea of kind of that morning power hour. And I think that really sets the tone for the day, at least for me, and having that time to connect spiritually, to pray, to read the Bible, and then I usually end up going on a jog, and I'll usually be praying still, while I'm jogging, and sometimes I'll even listen to something spiritual while I'm jogging, and then eating an amazing, healthy breakfast. I mean, that just sets the tone, and after that, I feel like I can face almost, anything from the day. But if I don't have that, I notice a big difference for sure.
Right. And adding to that too, it's a mindfulness practice too. When you think about reading the Bible or praying or spending time to journal a thought or an idea, just that little bit of time set aside. And it doesn't have to be much. It can be, 5-10 minutes to start. But it sets the tone because it slows us down to really be able to see what God wants us to see for the day.
Absolutely.
Versus waking up and rushing into the day. It helps us to really slow down and be able to see what's the highest value, what matters most, right? Yeah. Like that's why we put the oxygen mask on ourselves, like on a plane. Right. Same thing as fathers.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the first 3 points. So what about the fourth point?
Yeah, the fourth point I'd say is our parenting style and how we show up with raising our kids. What kind of what kind of ways do we help them grow, to nurture, to become eventually adults? And so there's different ways that we can go through that, different styles that families have, different books on different approaches, and they're all good. But sometimes it's also looking at what's going to be most what's going to be something that we can, for our style, our way of being with our kids, and also what's going to be most helpful for us being able to walk through parenting in a gracious way, in a way that's gentle, in a way that's discipling, while yet being disciplinary when needed.
Right. Yeah. And this is an area that I've had some interest in as far as like looking at the research behind different parenting styles. And when they look at the research on this, there's really 3 main parenting styles. There's the authoritative parenting style, there's the permissive, and then there's the autocratic. And what's interesting is that they found that when parents are permissive, and that basically means enabling, they're like warm and nurturing, but then they don't have healthy boundaries. That actually is not very helpful for the kids. Like, sure, they feel loved, and that's really awesome. But then they don't learn how to have self-control in their lives because they've never really been shown those limits and those boundaries. And then on the other hand, the autocratic, which is basically kind of like the cold, controlling parent where, the father's like, do it because I said so. And, you better get your butt in here. And because you're going to get it if you don't listen to me, kind of like this very like almost militant sort of approach to parenting. It's like, okay, that might get some initial results of obedience and that sort of thing. But guess what happens to the kids? They become, in the end, oftentimes either their wills and spirits kind of get broken, or they become really rebellious, and it does not lead to a good mental health outcome either. On the other hand, the authoritative way of parenting, the research shows, is clearly superior. And essentially there, what it is it's a combination of a lot of warmth, a lot of love, a lot of support, but also having clear boundaries, clear rules, and implementing those rules in a fair, consistent manner. And so there is the discipline, there is the consistency with that, but at the same time, there's warmth, and it's also, as appropriate, explaining like, okay, well, these are the rules, and this is why we don't. Now there's a caveat there. I mean, sometimes we just need them. We want them to obey right away, but then later we explain, why we're not just like, because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I'm a work in progress. So I'm not always doing this perfectly, but this is, I think, the direction that we can strive for as parents.
Well, and that's perfect. Like you said, like permissive parents, more of like the friend, right? Doesn't want to disappoint their kids and wants to give them extra, like treats and things like that just because the kid wants it. So it's almost giving the kid what they want, and it doesn't help them grow, right? And not giving them structure doesn't. And of course, being too that word they use, autocratic, right? So kids are going to end up, I've seen that happen in some of the school, even the Christian school I grew up with, the parents were overbearing. And so they grow up, they get out of school and they end up doing some wild stuff because they got so locked in a bubble. They weren't able to go and experience life. And I think the authoritative is great because it's almost like the rubber band where as they grow and show their character and their wisdom, we get to kind of expand that rubber band over time as they're showing their ability to handle life, the challenges that are thrown at them and being able to show how they're walking through that. And so as we're discipling them, that's the beautiful part about authoritative is by the time they, like graduate high school, they've already practiced so many, they've tried things in the healthy context of the family's home versus when they're later adults. And so you're able to we're walking with them just as we're learning, like me and you as dads, we're walking with them in that and sharing that and being real and open and vulnerable to, to the challenges that we face as well as they're facing too. So it gives them a chance to really think through situations, and understand like, why don't we do this? For instance, like, my 3-year-old trying to run out in the middle of the street instead of, I could go after him and, I could spank, I could yell, but really it's helping to, it's going to be a practice of going and helping him realize like, this is the danger of, and this is why we don't run out in the middle of the street. But I have to be patient as a father to be able to practice again and again. I think that's the hard part of being a dad. It's like, is my kid going to get this? But it's that repetition of like, we're doing this because it matters. And as our kids grow, they grow up, a lot of times, thank goodness, they do grow up and out of certain behaviors, patterns, but it's that repetition of showing consistency, and being on the same page with our spouse with the authoritative is huge too, because like you said with the kids at the beginning, where if I'm not on the same page with my spouse, then they can kind of play that in the disciplinary part of it too, and so being on the same page with my spouse when it comes to authoritative is I think another critical piece of that. Absolutely,
yeah, and it's really more about guiding their wills rather than breaking their wills, and teaching them how to be thinkers, teaching them to reason through things and make decisions, but to have that self-control at the same time.
And the comforts of being observed too.
Yeah.
Like, we were able to see them in action, so we can we really see and guide them through that. Versus waiting for things to happen. So it's a very proactive approach too, as leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the first 4. What's the final point to becoming
the final
an awesome
one
dad?
is I think the best part, and it's also one that I've been really reminded of lately. Is getting to know each of my kids. And I'd say the biggest part of that, and I heard this wisdom some years back, where getting to know my kids means being into what they're into, even if I'm not. Knowing what Savannah likes, knowing what Caleb likes, and of course Levi's 8 months, but even he's starting, he smiles his face, you know what he likes and different toys and things. It's getting to spend time with them. And I would say time can also be, relative to, like we were talking about, 5-10 minutes, personal time in the morning, 5 or 10 minutes with our spouse, but also making sure we have individual time with each of the kids to check in.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think it can be actually a really fun thing for everyone. Even like you said, if you're maybe not into dolls or whatever, but you just say, you know what, I'm going to play dolls with my daughter because she likes dolls. And it's like, okay, I'll do it. But after a while you can kind of like, oh, this is kind of fun. And you just get yourself in there and do it. And the most fun part about it, and the most rewarding part, is when you see that they really, how much it means to them, because they really love it when dad gets to their level in the best sense of the word, or the term, to really connect with them and to show that you really care about what they care about.
It's and to add to that too, like you said, it's it kind of goes along with validating their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think, my son's just upset, or my daughter's just, she's just upset with whatever happened. But really but being able to stop and validate that their experience is pretty big too, because it connects us further with them. It actually really helps with the authoritative style.
That's true.
Because they're more apt to actually follow through and with being led, right? When we're addressing their emotions, when we're spending time to be into what they're into, we're not having to struggle as much in the fight of parenting, of getting them to do, say, make your bed or certain chores that we want, that we have them doing on a regular basis at home.
Absolutely. And, one thing that I think goes along with this whole idea of getting to know our kids and playing with them, there's also, I've noticed that kids love working with their dads too,
Absolutely.
And that's one way they can also kind of get to know their dads too, right? And what we're into, and they love to do that. And they love to, model and or start to become more like dad. And I think that some of the best times that I can think of with my son, for example, has been when we've been like he loves to watch me cut down trees, and then we stack wood together, and he's a little scared of the saw, but he thinks which is a healthy fear, but he thinks it's the most awesome thing at the same time to watch a big tree coming crashing down. And so those are, some fun times or bonding moments that we can have, and yet we're still getting things done. So that can be a win-win.
And you think about that too. You make a good point there, that's how, in most of human history in the agrarian age, right? That's how we used to live before the industrial age.
Yeah.
And the information age is we'd spend time, the children would spend time with their parents, like the sons with their dads or daughters with their mothers. And we'd spend time really being together as we're teaching them about life and how to do certain tasks. We're doing life together.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about. It's like we're getting to know our kids by doing life together.
Absolutely. And as we're doing life together, I think it provides a lot of really great teaching moments. Even as we're working together, there's stuff that just comes up on the side, and things that you normally maybe wouldn't talk about, but then it's like an opportunity for teaching.
Which is great too, as you mentioned, that as fathers, as men, we oftentimes do well learning while we're doing something active, doing something with our hands, and that's a great way because kids love to play. Kids love to do things with their hands too. You ever just throw clay at them, or art or anything, and so as men, it's a great way to play.
Absolutely.
So we both get a lot from that experience.
So thank you so much, Steve. Any final words for our fathers out there?
Yeah, I think the biggest part is not putting too much pressure on yourself. I think, even though we're called as leaders, as men, as fathers and husbands, it's also we're a work in progress. And so having more grace with yourself through the process, connecting with other men, being mentored, being supported, being encouraged by other men that are in the battle too, of just, doing their best. And I think that's one thing I would definitely mention is getting around other men that you look up to, that you also can connect with, and you can share some of the wins, some of the challenges of parenting.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Because I think, like you said, sometimes we tend to be pretty hard on ourselves, and realizing like, hey, we all have these struggles. And the point is not the mistakes we make, but how we're growing, how we're learning, how God continues to accept us and love on us, even when we do make mistakes, and that he wants to keep helping us to grow. And, as we connect with other fathers to support one another, pray with one another, share, I think that can be a very powerful thing.
Absolutely.
So yeah, just as a quick recap for our listeners, we want to, number one, be present, schedule that time with our children, and then be present. Don't allow media, work, et cetera, to intrude into that time with our kids. Number two, take the time to connect with our spouses. It makes a big difference in our ability to father, and our parents, or our kids will definitely notice if we're on the same page with our spouse. Number three, take that time to personally recharge, connecting with God, ideally, in the morning for that power hour, but make that intentional time so that you don't get drained. You have to make sure you take care of yourself. It's not a selfish thing. Number four, practice authoritative parenting style. And number five, get to know your kids, have fun with them, work with them, and most importantly, remember that it is a journey becoming an ideal father. It's not an overnight experience. We're all a work in progress, and we're not alone in that process. God will help us.
Amen.
So thank you so much for being with us today, Steve. And
You're welcome.
Thank you to our listeners for being with us today. And may you be blessed, may you be encouraged, and know that you're not alone in the struggle to become a better father.
Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.